Draymond Green never cried on the court. Not when he broke his finger, not when he was ejected in the finals, but when Steph Curry found him alone in the locker room at 3 in the morning, what he discovered made the two toughest men in the NBA break down in tears. And what happened next changed everything. The Chase Center lay in sepulchral silence, like a sleeping giant after a lost battle. The scoreboard lights still glowed dimly, displaying the cruel result. Warriors 98, Lakers Points 113. It was more than numbers. It was a sentence written in blue and gold neon that seemed to scream the failure of a night that had begun with so much hope. Draymond Green remained motionless in his locker in the main locker room, a statue of muscles and sweat frozen in time. The number 23 uniform still clung to his body like a second skin soaked through, each fiber of the fabric carrying the weight of a defeat that hurt more than it should. His Nike sneakers were untied, the laces scattered across the floor like dead serpents, and his enormous hands, those hands that had blocked so many shots, created so many plays, hung inert between his muscular legs. The Warriors' locker room was a modern basketball sanctuary with polished mahogany lockers and LED screens displaying individual statistics. But at that moment, it felt more like a mausoleum, cold, empty, and haunted by the ghosts of past glories. The only sound was the distant hum of cleaning machines, traveling the arena corridors, collecting the vestiges of 20,000 shattered dreams. 23 years. Draymond repeated the number in his mind like a broken mantra. 23 years dedicated to basketball. From that first worn rubber ball his father had given him at 7 years old in Saginaw, Michigan. 4 NBA championships, each ring weighing more than the previous one on his fingers. A Defensive Player of the Year trophy that now seemed to mock him from its shelf at home. And yet, there he was, at 33 years old, feeling emptier than his elementary school gymnasium after the season's last game. The locker room door opened with a creak that echoed like a scream in the silence. Familiar footsteps, that unmistakable rhythm, half dance, half walk, announced Steph Curry's arrival before Draymond even lifted his eyes. It was impressive how, after 12 years playing together, he could identify each teammate just by the sound of their steps. "Forgot my beanie," Steph's voice cut through the air like tearing silk. There was something too studied in the casualness of his tone, as if he had rehearsed the phrase in the hallway before entering. Steph moved toward his locker, but his eyes never left Draymond's hunched figure. The contrast between them was striking. Steph still emanated that electric energy that made him special, while Draymond seemed to have been drained of all vitality. "Damn December cold," Steph continued, pulling the black wool beanie from his locker. "Isha said it might snow tomorrow. Snow in San Francisco. Can you believe it?" Draymond emitted a sound that could have been a laugh or a sigh. Even he wasn't sure. Steam from the showers still hung in the air, creating a ghostly mist that transformed the fluorescent lights into diffused halos. The smell of antibacterial soap and sweat mixed with the persistent aroma of sports liniment. "Man, that play in the third quarter," Steph began, leaning against the cold tiles. "When you blocked LeBron at the three-point line? That was pure art, man. I saw Kerr shake his head, impressed." "It was luck," Draymond murmured, his voice sounding like gravel being dragged across concrete. Steph froze. In 12 years of partnership, through glorious victories and devastating defeats, he had never heard Draymond Green attribute any of his defensive plays to luck. It was like hearing Beethoven call the Ninth Symphony a happy accident. Luck? Steph abandoned all pretense of casualness. Sitting on the bench facing Draymond, the wooden bench creaked under his weight, a sound that seemed amplified in the locker room's silence. "Dre, you read that play before LeBron even thought about it. I saw you adjust your position 3 times in the 5 seconds before he got the ball." Draymond finally lifted his head. His eyes, normally burning like hot coals, looked like frosted glass, opaque, lifeless, reflecting a pain that Steph recognized immediately. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror after Game 7 of the 2016 Finals, when Kevin Durant hurt his Achilles tendon in 2019, when the Disney bubble nearly broke them all in 2020. "I just want to go home," Draymond whispered, and there was something in the way he said "home" that made Steph realize he wasn't talking about his mansion in Brentwood. "Then, let's go," Steph responded without hesitation. "My car's in the garage. I can give you a ride." Clay left an hour ago, complaining about his knee again. Poole ran out, probably to post something on Instagram about process and journey. "No." The word came out like a shot, ricocheting off the tiled walls. Draymond immediately regretted the tone. "Sorry, Steph. I didn't mean—" He sighed, the sound echoing like wind in an empty canyon. "I just need to be alone for a while." Steph studied his friend's face like an archaeologist examining ancient hieroglyphs. Every line of expression, every tense muscle told a story. The clenched jaw that usually meant determination now seemed like contained pain. The broad shoulders, normally raised in defiance, curved as if carrying Atlas's weight. Outside, December rain began its symphony against the Chase Center's high windows. Each drop was a note in a melancholic melody that San Francisco played on those cold winter nights. The sound was hypnotic, almost consoling, as if the city wept alongside its fallen warriors. "The reporters were tough today," Steph observed, choosing his words like a surgeon chooses instruments. A bitter laugh escaped from Draymond, a sound that made Steph wince internally. "Monty Poole had the audacity to ask if I think I still deserve to be a starter, as if 12 years meant nothing, as if 4 rings were coincidence." He ran his hands over his face, his fingers trembling slightly. "And Rachel Nichols, she asked if I'm hindering the development of younger players." "Hindering, Steph. As if I were an obstacle, not the foundation." "Hey." Steph's voice gained a firmness he rarely used off the court. "You're not going to let those vultures get in your head. Not after everything we've built. You know who you are, Draymond Green." "Do I?" The question hung in the air like toxic smoke. Draymond looked directly into Steph's eyes, and there was a desperation there that made the point guard's heart tighten. "Because lately, when I look in the mirror, I don't recognize the man staring back at me. I see someone, pretending to be Draymond Green, wearing his skin like a poorly fitted disguise." The locker room plunged into silence again, broken only by the growing drumming of rain and the distant tick-tock of a clock no one could see but everyone could hear. It was the sound of time passing, relentless and indifferent to the human dramas unfolding under its eternal gaze. Steph could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air between them, heavy as lead. There was something more, something Draymond was holding like a drowning man grips a weight that pulls him down, knowing it will kill him, but unable to let go. "Dre," Steph began, his voice soft as velvet but strong as steel. "Whatever's happening, you know you can—" "I know." Draymond stood up abruptly, his 6 feet 6 inches of height, seeming to shrink under the invisible weight he carried. He began undressing mechanically, each movement robotic and lifeless. "I know, Steph. Thank you." But there was something in the way he said, "Thank you," that sounded more like goodbye. Steph remained seated for another long moment, watching his friend move through the locker room like a ghost haunting his own life. When he finally stood to leave, he stopped at the door, his hand on the cold metal handle. "If you change your mind about that ride," he offered one last time. "I'll call," Draymond responded without turning around, his words echoing empty as promises made to ghosts. Steph left, but not before capturing one last image that would be burned into his mind. Draymond Green, the man who had faced LeBron James in epic battles, who had screamed in Kevin Durant's face, who had never backed down from any challenge, was there alone, his reflection in the locker room mirror showing not a warrior, but a broken man. The rain continued falling over San Francisco, washing the streets and dreams, while at the Chase Center, a champion's heart bled in silence. And Steph Curry knew, with the certainty of someone who knows a brother, that the next day he would have to figure out how to save not just a teammate, but a friend from the darkness that threatened to consume him. 3:15 in the morning. The red numbers of the digital clock glowed like demonic eyes in the darkness of Draymond's kitchen, casting crimson shadows on the walls of his $3 million house in Brentwood. Through the floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, Los Angeles spread like an ocean of flickering lights, each luminous point representing a life, a story, a dream, or nightmare. Draymond held a coffee cup he had prepared at 2 in the morning. The liquid, once steaming and comforting, now lay cold and bitter as the memories that kept him awake. His iPhone 13 Pro was propped against a bowl of imported fruits he never ate, the screen illuminated showing "Mama" in letters that seemed to pulse with each second of the call. "Mom, tell me the truth. How was he today?" His voice cut through the silence of the empty house like a dull blade, doing the job, but causing more pain than necessary. On the other side of the country, in a modest house in Saginaw, Michigan, where the wallpaper still showed the height marks of 6 green children, Mary Babers Green sat in her small but immaculate kitchen. She held the phone with one hand, while the other unconsciously caressed a family photo taken last Christmas. The last one where everyone seemed truly happy. "Draymond, baby." Her voice carried the weight of a mother who had spent her life protecting her children from the world's harshness, but now faced a truth that not even her fierce love could soften. "He had another episode early today. At 5 in the morning. I woke up to him struggling to breathe, hand on his chest." She paused, and Draymond could hear the tremor she was trying to hide. The doctors at the municipal hospital did what they could, but they said, "We need specialists. His heart is weaker than we thought. There's something about ejection, fraction and numbers I don't understand, but I know they're not good." Draymond closed his eyes tightly, pressing his forehead with his free hand until it hurt. Wallace Davis Green Sr., the man who had worked double shifts at the General Motors factory for 30 years, who never complained even when his back screamed in pain, who had driven 8 hours in a rented rusty van just to see Draymond's first professional game, the man whose calloused hands had applauded louder than 20,000 fans at Oracle Arena. "He asked about you," Mary continued, and now tears were audible in her voice. "Even with all that morphine, he opened his eyes and asked, 'Is my boy okay? He looks tired on TV?'" Draymond's heart contracted. Even at death's door, Wallace Green worried more about his son than himself. "How much?" Draymond asked, already knowing the question would wound his mother's pride. "The specialists, the tests, everything. How much?" Mary sighed, the sound traveling 2,000 miles through cell towers and fiber optic cables, but maintaining all its emotional weight. "Son, you already do so much for us." "Mom." His voice gained the firmness he used on the court when he needed to organize the defense. "Please, how much?" "Dr. Shapiro, the cardiologist Mrs. Johnson recommended. You remember her from church? He said it would be about 50,000 just for the complete tests. If he needs surgery..." She paused again. "It could reach 200,000. Our health plan covers part, but..." "I'll send the money tomorrow," Draymond said automatically, even as his stomach churned. "Draymond, it's not just about money," Mary said softly. "Your father, he wants you here. He doesn't say it. That stubborn man would never admit it. But I see it in his eyes every time your name appears on ESPN. He records all your games, you know? Even the practices that air on NBA TV." Draymond stood up and walked to the window. Down below, on Sunset Boulevard, cars passed even at that hour. Los Angeles never slept, just like the guilt that gnawed at his insides. "There's something else," he said, the words coming out like a confession in a divine court. "Marcus, my financial advisor, that portfolio we set up for you all to guarantee everyone would be well off forever." "What happened?" Mary's voice became sharp, maternal instinct detecting danger. "He invested everything in a tech startup. He guaranteed it was safe, that in 2 years we'd double the value." Draymond pressed his forehead against the cold window glass. "The company went bankrupt last month. We lost everything. $2.3 million. The silence that followed was so profound that Draymond could hear his own heart beating. In Saginaw, Mary Green, the woman who had raised 6 children on a janitor's salary, who had performed miracles with discount coupons and garage sales, processed the loss of more money than her entire family had seen in generations. $2 million, she whispered. 2.3, Draymond corrected bitterly. The money that was supposed to pay for the nephew's college, to pay off the house, to guarantee that Dad could retire with dignity. Draymond Jamal Green, Mary said, using his full name as only mothers know how to do. You listen to me now, and listen well. We survived without millions for 50 years. We'll survive 50 more if God wills it. But I promised. Draymond's voice broke. I promised you'd never have to worry again. That all the sacrifices you made for me would be rewarded. Oh, my baby, Mary sighed, and Draymond could imagine her shaking her head in that small kitchen where he had done homework for years. You've already rewarded us 1,000 times, not with money, but with pride. Do you know how many people in Saginaw wear your jersey? Do you know how many children say they want to be like Draymond Green? A solitary tear descended Draymond's face, followed by another and another, until he was crying silently against the window of his empty mansion, 2,500 miles from the only home that really mattered. Sometimes, he whispered, I feel so lost, Mom. Like I'm playing a game where I don't understand the rules anymore. That's because you're trying to play alone, Mary responded, with the wisdom of a woman who had faced poverty, racism, and despair, and had defeated them all with love and determination. Even Michael Jordan needed Scottie Pippen. They talked for another hour about childhood memories, about how Torian was handling the divorce, about how LJ was doing in school. Mary told how Wallace had watched that night's game even from the hospital, yelling at the nurses about referee decisions. When they finally hung up, it was almost 5 in the morning. The Los Angeles sky was beginning to clear, painting the clouds pink and orange like a divine watercolor. Draymond stood in the kitchen, the phone still warm in his hand, looking at a photo on the device. Him at 12 years old, thin and smiling, holding a cheap plastic trophy next to his father. Wallace had his arm around his son, both covered in sweat and radiant with pure happiness. "I love you, Dad," he whispered to the photo. "And I'm sorry. Sorry for not being there." Outside, Los Angeles woke to another day, oblivious to the fact that in a mansion in Brentwood, one of the NBA's toughest men cried like the child who, deep down, had never stopped being. The Chase Center training gym vibrated with the controlled energy of a warrior's morning routine. It was a symphony of familiar sounds, the staccato of basketballs bouncing in different rhythms, the hiss of sneakers against the waxed floor, the shouts of instructions echoing off the high walls. But for Steph Curry, something in the melody was off-key. He watched Draymond during warm-up, noticing every discordant detail. The way he took half a second longer to react to passes. How his defensive shouts, normally thunder that organized the defense like a maestro conducts an orchestra, had been reduced to hesitant murmurs. How his eyes, always scanning the court like a predator, now seemed focused on some distant point only he could see. "Guys, let's go to the defensive rotation drill," shouted Mike Brown, the assistant coach, clapping his hands to get attention. The players positioned themselves, but Draymond was a step behind. When Jordan Poole initiated the simulated attack, Draymond should have rotated to cover Klay Thompson in the corner. Instead, he stood still, as if his feet were cemented to the floor. "Switch! Switch, Draymond!" Brown yelled, his voice ricocheting off the walls. But it was too late. Klay was completely open, and even in practice, the failure was glaring. The gym fell silent for a moment, the kind of silence that happens when something fundamentally wrong occurs, like a pianist hitting a sour note in a concert. Steve Kerr, who was watching closely from the sideline, frowned. In 15 years as a coach, he had developed a sixth sense for problems, and every alarm in his head was going off. "Water! 5 minutes," Kerr announced, though they were only 20 minutes into practice. The players dispersed toward the water bottles, whispering among themselves. Andrew Wiggins cast a worried glance at Draymond. Kevon Looney, always the silent observer, shook his head almost imperceptibly. Steph approached Draymond, who stood in the middle of the court, like a solitary island in an agitated sea. "Did you sleep?" Steph asked quietly. "Do I ever sleep?" Draymond responded, but there wasn't the usual humor in the answer. It was just an empty statement. Practice resumed, but things only got worse. During a basic pick-and-roll exercise, something Draymond and Steph had executed thousands of times, something they could do in their sleep, Draymond passed the ball directly to where Steph had been 2 seconds earlier. The ball bounced sadly out of bounds. What the hell was that? Moses Moody, the rookie, let slip before realizing who he was talking to. Draymond didn't respond, didn't yell, didn't give one of those stares that made rookies shrink. He just looked at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. The next drill was a full scrimmage, starters against reserves. Normally, this would be Draymond's moment to shine, organizing the defense like a general on the battlefield. Instead, it was a massacre. He lost 3 consecutive passes, each error more improbable than the last. He let Jonathan Kuminga, a second-year player, dribble past him like he was a practice cone. "Time!" Kerr yelled, his patience finally exhausted. "Draymond, are you okay? And I want the truth. Not that I'm perfect bullshit you've been repeating." Draymond began, but the words died in his throat. The entire gym was watching. Teammates, coaches, staff. 20 pairs of eyes waiting for an answer he didn't have. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. Steph could see the exact moment when something inside Draymond finally broke. It was visible in his eyes, like watching a dam give way in slow motion. "I can't," Draymond murmured, so low that only those closest heard. "What?" Kerr approached. "Can't what?" And then it happened. "I can't anymore." Draymond's explosion echoed through the gym like a cannon shot. But it wasn't anger. It was pure agony. The sound of a man who had held pain for so long that it finally exploded. "I can't pretend everything's okay. I can't smile for the cameras. I can't be the tough guy who holds everyone together." His voice broke, and with it, the mask he had worn for so long. "My father is dying, and I'm here playing a game like it matters." The gym plunged into silence so deep that the sound of Draymond's heavy breathing seemed deafening. Players who had seen Draymond face LeBron James without blinking now watched him crumble like a house of cards in a gale. Draymond fell, to his knees in the middle of the court, hands clutching his head, his whole body shaking with sobs he could no longer contain. It was a surreal sight. The man who was the Warriors' emotional foundation, reduced to rubble on the sacred floor where they had built dynasties. Steph reacted first, protective instinct taking control. He made an urgent gesture for everyone to step back. "Guys, let's give him some space. Now." Klay Thompson, understanding immediately, began leading the younger players. "Out. Come on, everyone. Practice is over for today." Kerr hesitated, torn between his role as coach and his human concern. Steph caught his eyes and gave a firm nod. The coach understood. This was beyond basketball now. Within minutes, the gym was empty, except for Steph and Draymond. The echo of bouncing balls was replaced by the sound of a man breaking into pieces. Steph knelt beside his friend, not caring about the sweat on the floor or his expensive uniform. "Talk to me, Dre, brother." "My dad is dying, Steph." The words came out between sobs. "His heart is failing. He needs surgery that costs a fortune, and I lost the family money. $2,300,000, Steph. Gone. Evaporated like smoke." Steph remained silent, understanding that sometimes the most important thing isn't words, but presence. "I can't even remember the last time I said, 'I love you' to him," Draymond continued, now sitting on the floor, legs crossed like a child. "What if he dies thinking, 'Basketball is more important to me than he is'? What if his last memories are of watching me on TV instead of having me beside him?" "He knows you love him," Steph said softly. "Does he?" Draymond looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "Because I've spent the last 5 years prioritizing games over visits. 5 years, Steph. 5 years of next summer I'll go more. After the playoffs, I'll stay longer. And now..." His voice broke completely. "And now, there might not be a next summer." Steph felt tears in his own eyes. He had known Draymond for over a decade, had seen him face every kind of adversity, but had never seen him so human. "You're a good son, Dre," Steph said, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "And he knows that." "Good son?" Draymond laughed bitterly through tears. "A good son would be there. A good son would have protected the family money. A good son..." "A good son is exactly what you are," Steph interrupted firmly. "You think your father cares about money? You think he watches your games because of contracts or rings? He watches because he sees the man he raised living his dream. They sat on the gym floor for another half hour, two of the greatest basketball players of their generation, reduced to what they really were. Two men trying to navigate life's complexities, love and loss. When Draymond finally calmed down enough to speak clearly, he looked at Steph with a vulnerability few had ever seen. "I need to go home," he said simply. Then, "Let's go," Steph responded without hesitation. "But the team, the games." "Fuck the team," Steph said, and Draymond almost smiled. Steph Curry rarely cursed. Family first. Always. As he helped Draymond to his feet, Steph was already formulating a plan in his mind. He would make some calls, move some mountains if necessary, because that's what brothers did for each other. And at that moment, on the sacred floor of the Chase Center, two champions proved that life's most important victories have nothing to do with scoreboards. Steph Curry's Gulfstream G650 cut through the night sky at 41,000 feet altitude, a luxury capsule flying over sleeping America. Below, city lights passed like terrestrial constellations. Salt Lake City, Denver, Omaha, each marking another mile on Draymond's journey home. Inside the softly lit cabin, Draymond stared out the oval window, his reflection superimposed on the moon-illuminated clouds. He still couldn't fully believe what had happened in the last 12 hours. Steph had not only gotten Kerr to release them in the middle of the season with crucial games approaching, but had also organized everything. The jet, the car that would wait for them in Detroit, even a consultation with one of the country's best cardiologists. "Stop thinking so loud," Steph said from the opposite seat, looking up from his iPad where he was reviewing medical emails. "I can hear your gears turning from here." Draymond tried to smile, but the result was more of a grimace. "I still don't understand why you did all this." Steph put the iPad aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The cabin was so quiet, they could hear the soft hum of the jet engines. "You want the short answer or the long one?" "We have 5 hours of flight," Draymond responded. Steph leaned back, his eyes focusing on some distant memory. "Remember our first training camp together? 2012? How could I forget? You looked like you were going to throw up at every drill." "I was terrified," Steph admitted. "I had just recovered from ankle surgeries. The media was saying I was made of glass, that the Warriors had wasted a contract extension on me. And then, on the second day, that scrimmage. When Bogut knocked you down hard," Draymond completed, remembering. "Knocked down is a euphemism. He massacred me, and everyone laughed, veterans being veterans, testing the fragile kid." Steph shook his head at the memory. "Everyone except you." Draymond frowned. He barely remembered the specific incident. There had been so many practices, so many battles. "You helped me up," Steph continued. "And when we were in the huddle, you whispered, 'Next time he comes, stay 2 steps to the left. I'll be waiting.' And you were. You blocked Bogut so hard he was complaining for a week." "It was just basketball," Draymond murmured. "No," Steph said firmly. "It was you telling me I wasn't alone, that someone had my back. You've done that for me 100 times since then, on courts, in locker rooms, in board meetings. Now it's my turn." The plane hit a light turbulence zone, making the drinks tremble gently in their holders. Outside, distant lightning illuminated cloud formations like flashes from a cosmic camera. "I always tried to be the strong guy," Draymond said after a long silence. "In the family, on the team. It was my role, you know? Draymond, the tough guy. Draymond, the protector. Draymond, the problem solver. And who protects the protector? Steph asked softly. The question hung in the cabin's thin air like incense in a cathedral. My dad used to say, Draymond began, his voice thick with emotion, that a real man never lets his family see him sweat. That strength was enduring pain alone, so others wouldn't have to carry the burden. With all due respect to your father, Steph said carefully, that's bullshit. Draymond looked up, surprised. Real strength, Steph continued, is knowing when you need help. It's letting the people who love you completely. Not just the easy parts, but also the broken, scared, imperfect ones. Are you quoting Isha? Draymond asked, a touch of genuine humor appearing for the first time in days. Every word, Steph smiled. That woman saved my life more times than I can count, especially in 2019, when my father... He stopped, recomposing himself. Draymond leaned forward, realizing Steph was about to share something he rarely discussed. When my father had the stroke, Steph continued, I was in the middle of the playoffs. Warriors against Rockets, you remember? I was obsessed, studying film 18 hours a day, practicing until my hands bled. When my mother called about Dad, my first thought, God forgive me, was about the bad timing. Steph rubbed his face, the memory clearly still painful. I almost didn't go see him. Almost chose basketball over my father. It was you, Clay, and Andre, who literally dragged me out of the gym, put me in a car, and sent me to the hospital. You guys missed a crucial practice to make sure I didn't miss something irreplaceable. I don't remember it being that dramatic, Draymond said, but there was gratitude in his voice. You guys saved my relationship with my father, Steph said simply. Those 3 hours I spent with him before surgery, listening to him talk about pride, about legacy, about what really matters. It changed everything. If you hadn't forced me to go, I would have missed that. They flew in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own memories. The co-pilot announced they were beginning initial descent into Detroit. You know what scares me most? Draymond said, as Michigan's lights began appearing below. What? That my father will look at me and see a stranger. That I've changed so much chasing greatness that the son he raised doesn't exist anymore? Steph thought carefully before responding. Or maybe he'll see exactly the man he dreamed. You'd become? Imperfect, yes. Struggling, certainly. But still his son, coming home when it matters most. When the wheels touched the Detroit Metropolitan Airport asphalt, it was almost 3 in the morning. A black SUV waited for them, along with Michigan's cutting air that made San Francisco's cold seem tropical. The car ride to Saginaw was silent, each mile taking Draymond closer to a reckoning he had postponed for too long. Steph had insisted on accompanying him to the end, refusing the 5-star hotel in Detroit, in favor of being present for whatever came next. When they arrived at Henry Ford Hospital, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with dawn's first tones. The hospital was a monolith of concrete and hope, where miracles and tragedies danced their eternal waltz. Mary Babers Green was waiting in the lobby, looking like she had aged years in months. But when she saw Draymond, her face lit up with the kind of joy only mothers can produce. "My baby," she whispered, enveloping him in a hug that smelled of lavender and home. "You came." "Of course I came, Mama," Draymond responded, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Sorry it took so long." Mary pulled back to look at Steph, who stood awkwardly to the side. "And you brought family." "Mrs. Green," Steph began, but Mary silenced him with a fierce hug. "None of that, Mrs. You brought my son home. Your family now." They went up to Wallace's room on the 3rd floor, the elevator playing a melancholic melody. The corridor smelled of disinfectant and silent despair, punctuated by the distant beep of machines maintaining life. Wallace Green was awake, looking out the window at Detroit's streets awakening. When he heard the door open, he turned slowly. "Well, well," he said, his voice hoarse but carrying a touch of old humor. "The prodigal son returns," and brought NBA royalty with him. "Dad," Draymond said, the word carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken conversations. "Come here, boy," Wallace said, waving weakly. Draymond crossed the room in 3 quick steps, taking his father's hand with infinite care. It was shocking how fragile it seemed. These hands that had built cars, that had taught Draymond to dribble, that had applauded at 1,000 games. "Sorry," Draymond began, but Wallace squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "For what? For living your dream? For becoming everything I knew you could be?" Wallace shook his head. "Never apologize for flying, son. Just remember to land once in a while." "I should have come earlier. Should have—" "You're here now," Wallace interrupted. "That's all that matters." Steph watched from the doorway as father and son talked about basketball, about family, about fears and hopes. He saw Draymond tell about the lost money, saw Wallace laugh and say money was just paper, that the real investment had been worth it. "You know what I tell everyone at the dialysis center?" Wallace asked. "I say, my son is Draymond Green, not the basketball player, my son. Because basketball is what you do, not who you are." Draymond cried then, not the silent tears from before, but deep sobs of relief and liberation. Wallace pulled him close, and for a moment they weren't an NBA star and a retired factory worker. They were just father and son, connected by love that transcends time and distance. When Dr. Patel arrived at 8 in the morning, the specialist Steph had managed to contact, he found a scene that made him pause. Draymond Green sleeping in an uncomfortable chair beside his father's bed, their hands still intertwined, while Steph Curry dozed on the nearby couch, standing guard over both. "Family?" the nurse asked quietly to Mary. "All of it," Mary responded, looking at the 3 men with fierce love. "All my family is here." In the following weeks, Wallace would undergo successful surgery. Draymond would divide his time between rehabilitation and court, finally learning the balance that had escaped him for so long. Steph would be there for every step, proving that brotherhood isn't measured in blood, but in presence. But that morning, in the hospital room bathed in Michigan dawn's golden light, 3 men had learned that true strength wasn't carrying burdens alone, but having the courage to share them with those who love us enough to help carry them. And sometimes, in life's game, that's the most important victory of all.